So the question is, what do I scale the cube? Are you talking about the one that's already in there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is definitely just a placeholder. The cube is all about however big your spline is. So the understanding is everyone's going to have something a little bit different, and that's what you're going to skew and change the cube to fit it. So in this case, I actually moved mine around to fit it after we had done that previous exercise on Wednesday. I had trimmed up my lines with that cube. I kind of reverse engineered it, but it was the same thing that we had when I did Brandon's thing, and that I shifted it and moved it based on whatever is to fit. And basically I just did that by going in the top view, checking it out, then going into the lateral views and checking it out. And the goal is that we're doing 10 by 10. One reason we're doing 10 by 10 is so that we can do a full bleed on the drawing, right? So we're really trying to maximize the amount of space that it takes up. We're not really concerned with everyone having a set scale because we're going to use a graphic scale. We're trying to get this to occur on as many views as possible. Now, granted, it's not going to be this good on all of them, but it's a good starting off point to get it with the top one because it tends to be one of the wider ones. But if you look at my different views, it lined out fairly well. So I'm just going to, that's my front view, my right view, my bottom view. You can see that the Rhino annotations are actually on a perpendicular plane. So top and bottom, the top ones are going to show to us, but they're actually pointed down. So because we want ours pointed up and to the right, not down to the right, that's why you have separate layers for the annotations that happen there. So I need to turn that top layer off for my annotations, but they are still showing up. And actually, if I had other layers on, they'd be showing up too. They would just be 0 dimension, but they'd still actually print as flat lines. And that could be a little confusing. You don't want to have like little extra flat lines. Keep in mind, we've also got the little crosses in there as well. Okay, so our goal is to have a drawing that has all 6 that we can export it out. And we're actually going to do it all at the same time when it comes to the export. And it's going to go into a template that's waiting for it. So just to kind of give you a refresher on what's going on with the cube itself, if you need to rescale this cube, the gumball is the best way to do it. You can grab any of these squares that are here, and you just have to hold shift when you scale them. So if I grab this one and I hold shift, it's going to be a uniform scale, and I'm not worried about my projections. So the actual process is me in different views trying to see how close I can get it on all the boundaries to kind of maximize my drawing. So you can see the result was a little bit smaller than that. If you guys have any questions, just shout them out. Definitely don't raise your hand. It's so dark in here. All I can see is my screen right now. So far, so good? Yeah? Okay. So I want to get these things out. And if you've taken a look at the template, and then you obviously have seen it before if you've already done it, we've got some things down here. Actually, I don't know if I've got them in my file, so I might actually have to grab them from the template file because I didn't save it when I brought them in. But the template file does have them, so let me grab the template file. It has guides for how to scale the drawings and also the graphic scale as well. All right, so they're on this 2 layers here. I'm just gonna select those layers. Oh no. Do it one more time. Sorry, I didn't copy. Play it safe this time.
Okay. Since they're clipboard objects, they're going to show up in the same spot as in the other model relative to the origin point. I'm going to turn them off for a second. And I can actually start concentrating on my drawings. The first drawing I'm going to do is in the top view. And the order that we want you to use is to do the top and then the bottom. I'm going to move these layers in that view, in that order, so you can kind of see. But you'll also see it. It's really clear on the Illustrator template. Back, left, and then right. Top, bottom, front, back, left, right. That's the order that we're going to do the drawings. I'm going to switch to my top view. The important part here is that my annotations are on for the top view, and only the top view. So this layer right here is what I'm worried about, top view layer. Other thing I want to be sure of is that I created a wireframe boundary as well. If I turn on the shaded view, this is going to be the resulting drawing with everything on the inside as hidden lines if I do the make 2D right now. Right? So I want to actually use that silhouette command and make a wireframe outline of it. So that's under curve from objects. I'm going to do a silhouette. And that's all curves, one for each edge of the box that we've got. So I'm going to grab my extrusion and I'm going to hide it. I'm just going to hit Control H and hide it. So now I've got the same boundary, but now they're curves. My make 2D is good to go. So I'm going to run the make 2D command. It's underneath analyze, make 2D drawing. Well, it used to be. Actually, it's under dimension. Sorry. Make 2D drawing. My objects to draw. I want to draw my annotations. I want to draw my extended lines. I want to draw my boundary, and I want to draw my splines. And even before I do that, one thing I want to do is I can leave these 3D curves a color. I'll change them when they're flat. I'll leave them a color right now. So I'm going to turn off my points because they're not going to show up anyway in the make 2D drawing. They're not going to come in into Illustrator. Points objects won't show up, and we don't need them anyway because we're using those crosshairs. So this is good. You want to just, one thing to be careful of is make sure that you've got the little markers on there on this layer, because you can't see them. They're kind of invisible right now. So just make sure the layer's on and you've done them on the right layer. And then I'll hit enter to accept it. It'll bring up the make 2D dialog, hopefully eventually. Might have too many things open right now. So we've got some options here. I'm just worried about the current view. I'm not going to do multiple views at one time because I've only got my front annotations right now. I don't need to worry about tangent or hidden lines, so I've got those options off. And I'm going to maintain the source layers. That's important because it'll allow me to differentiate what's on what layer. And this is just telling me where my new stuff's going to go. So I'm going to have a layer called that with my visible lines and a layer called make 2D annotation with my annotations on there. So I'm just going to say okay, and you can see that it made all those new layers down there with all that information on it. And this is my 2D drawing. It just happens to look exactly the same because right now I'm in the top view. So I'm going to group it real quick. I'm going to hit Control G and group it so that I don't leave anything behind, and I just move that over. Now I've got a two-dimensional version of that, and that's my front drawing. So I'm going to lay this out in a row, and the next one I'm going to do is the bottom one. So I'm going to switch the annotation layers to the bottom, switch my view to the bottom, and I'm going to repeat the exact same process. If I'm not sure which one's which, this is a good time to change the layer colors down here of the flat one. So I'm going to grab all four layers actually of our different splines, and I'm going to click the color box on one of them, and I'm going to change it to black. Now I know which one's which, right? Reselect all the objects that are visible, and I'm just going to run the make 2D command again, checking that my annotations are on bottom. I'm good to go. And I've just got to run this process a couple more times, unfortunately. Don't have to change any of my settings, and it's not going to make any new layers because I've already got those layers. So at my top view, I'm just going to group them. Use the move command. And line it right up to the one before it. And then I'm going to go and let's see. Did the bottom, now I'm going to go do the front view. So I switch to the front view. Hopefully yours will be quicker because you won't be recording at the same time. Options are the same. You can see it's hanging out here. Everything when you deal with Make 2D drawings is you've got to be in the top view to deal with it because it comes in the world C plane. So I do a group, do a move. M is the shortcut. It's the alias for move. And I'm already halfway done exporting my drawings. So now it's time for the back one. Ooh. Bad news. Nobody helped me out on that one. I left some extra stuff on there. So I've got multiple callouts that I didn't need with the back and the left views. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're going to show up as little flat objects that are going to kind of come in aligned with this. So I'm going to have some extra curves I'd have to worry about because I didn't turn these views off when I did those drawings, because I've got little extra notations, but they're just kind of hanging out there. But the ones I have, I do have the ones I visually need. So as far as that's concerned, it's actually at a good spot. So I've got my 6 drawings already done. I'm going to take a look at my layers here, and I've got these references and I've got graphic scales as well. So at this time I can turn off my 3D stuff. I can go down here to my Make 2D, turn off some of my 3D objects. I can turn off my point cloud. I can turn off my splines. I can also get rid of my extension lines, my intersections there. So now I'm going to grab those. These boxes, the only thing special about these boxes is they're all 10 inches by 10 inches square. That's it. That's all they've got going for them. So I'm going to move my drawings over to the corner of that reference. And I'm going to use that same command, scale 2D. My origin point is going to be the shared corner right there. And I'm always going to the object first that's getting moved or scaled. So in this case, it's this corner. And then the second move is always go to where I'm scaling it to. So I go down to my little reference boxes down here. Now they're down there. So I've got my drawings down there. Okay. I've got really big annotations because these annotations are not unlike my text. They're annotations that have a style related to them, right? Annotations always want to. That way you can annotate your model no matter how big the model is. It would be silly if the annotations change scales too, right? It just happens that our when we examine these points, the output was annotations, so that's what we're dealing with. Not a problem. I can rescale. I can resize those. Anybody have any question about anything so far, or what just happened, or anything like that?
Yeah. How did you scale these back? That just making that line.
How did I?
Like instead of just there to do this right here, to make it like
Scale 2D.
Yeah.
So the important thing with the scaling is that you want to start them with have them in something in the same spot, right? So they have that shared corner. So that's my origin. Every scale operation has a corner or an origin point, right? So I could have done it on the left-hand side too. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that that's my origin point, right? So that allows me to go anywhere and use one point to tell as a first reference, and that first reference will always get scaled to the second reference. So now when I run that command, scale 2D, my origin point, I always pick the shared point, right? And my first reference is already the thing that's not at the right scale. So I'm showing it 100% of the unscaled object, and I reference it to 100% of the object that's already at the right scale. So it's always those corresponding 2 points, right? You always need 3 good points to do one of those scaling operations, right? How does it work? Well, you got to make sure your box is perfectly a cube, right? So the one I gave you is one. If you use that one and do a uniform gumball scale on it, you're fine. If you make your own, you just have to make sure that it's the same dimensions in all spots. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing a lot of kind of extra work that's really not worth it. So just be kind of careful with your dimensions. Does that answer your question? Okay, so we're pretty close. We've actually got a bunch of 10 by 10 drawings. We've got huge numbers, so I can change that here. I'm going to go in, and when I do my make 2D, you can see I've got annotations. It's always based on what came in. So it remembers, well, he had an annotation layer with point clouds. Those point clouds had notations, and those notations were based on what view, even though they're all flat now. So I'm just going to take that top layer and right-click it and select the sublayer object, which will not only, since there's nothing on the top layer, all this stuff's on the sublayers, I've got to use this command. If I do this, I get nothing. So I've got to go down and I do sublayers. And that's going to pick all 6 drawings annotations. And I'm going to look at my properties. The properties is this circle, this rainbow circle that talks about each object. And since everything I grabbed was an annotation, I've got this button now that only talks about leaders. And it has its own properties. One of the leaders properties for our inch decimal is that the leader size is like a 3/4 of an inch tall, right? I'm going to change that. So instead of just totally overriding my dimension style, I'm just going to click this button that says property overrides right here. This allows me to change any of the properties of this thing. And the one I'm going to change is the text height. So just as a kind of a background on this, when I went back and looked at the 2 distances that got changed, the shift is 7.5, right? So the big one that we had was 7.5 times the size of our little 10 by 10 boxes. But that's for mine, right? It's going to be different if your box is a different size. So that shouldn't matter. Whatever you've got, your text height is going to be a universal size once it's down in the drawing. So I'm going to change this to 0.1 is the size that I want to use. And I hit OK. And now these are at the size that's still the same as my original one, right? So whatever you end up, you want that. For these objects, wait till it's like this, right? And bring it in the same at this, and scale it in at the same size that I did these really large objects. When I look at my my boundary objects, let's go find that for a second. Right, the scale on that was a 0.75 scale. So if I were to scale that at the same size at the same time, it would have come in at the same one. So I think I'll do that just to make it simpler. Basically, you just want to scale that sky. Instead of scaling differently, you scale them at the same time, and everything is the same size because your model was whatever size that your point clouds dictated, and this scale is already at the size that it says it's in. It's at a foot, and that's a foot too. So I'll say okay. So hopefully you totally erased the previous experience from your mind and pretended like it's perfect now, right? Just in your minds, I just pretend like I waited to when I remember I scaled all 6 of those drawings down. This is the same as if I grabbed this guy too and took him along for the ride. I tried to make it simpler, I made it more complicated. That happens when you try and teach, unfortunately. But now it's actually at the right size. So like in terms of your drawing, this thing here is a foot by a foot, right? So you need to obviously make it, I would say, smaller than that. And this time you're just scaling the object itself, the actual scale itself. So you're not gonna, right now it's accurate. So any changes I made, I've got to change the numbers here, right? So if I do this half the size, it's going to be half an inch. Quarter of the size is going to be a quarter of an inch. So I'll scale it in place right now and kind of show you what I mean by that. So I'll do transform. I'll scale it 2D. And I'm going to do 0.5. That's still kind of big. So right now this is half an inch. So I'm going to do it one more time from the origin, and it's 0.5 again. And that's a little bit better. And I think that's a good size for my drawing. So for me, this value is what? Yeah, right. So half of it, right, is half a foot. Another half is 3 inches. So right now that's 3 inches. Yeah. So it's in a group. So if you double click a text object, right, you can change the value of it. So I'm going to change this. Since I've got this dashing here, I don't want to go in and move everything again. I'm going to use the same convention as everybody else is going to have, no matter what size. And I'm just going to leave 0 feet 1 inch on there, right? And hit enter. Oh, don't hit enter. You can just go out there, right? And I don't have to re-justify the text or even it can stay in the group. So all I'm doing is I'm double clicking that object. Even though it's in a group, I can still change its text, right? Oops. We can redo any of those steps too once we run through it one time if you want more feedback on the scaling and stuff like that. So what happened? Well, this text is not great. I could definitely go and play with all this text back in Illustrator, but that's more of a by sight thing. I'd rather just use the numbers to do it. And does anybody remember how big those numbers are? Yeah, 0.1. So I'm just going to change the height on this object. So I actually am going to ungroup it. I can go to edit under groups, so I'm going to ungroup it. and I can look at its properties. I'm going to look at both of the object's properties. Never do things twice if you can get away with doing them one time. So this is like a third of my other ones here. Right here it tells me the height. I'm just going to change it to 0.1. And I can just use the gumball to find a good spot for it. Like that. Right? Now our text is matching. We've got one good graphic scale. I want to group it again so nothing gets loose on it. And I'm going to make some copies of it. In the template, we've got a little marker that has this as being like a quarter, I think it's a 1/4 inch off. It might be a 1/2 inch off. We'll take a look at it when it comes in there. If we have to move it, we have to move it. Actually, we've got the template here, so we've got a completed version of it. This is the drawing itself in there. And if I hit and turn on my guides for a second, I can take a look and see what that distance is. Yeah, it's a 1/4 inch. Should have trusted my instinct. Okay. So I might as well move that now instead of later. It's easier to move something with CAD. So I'm just going to take the gumball and hit the red arrow and say, since the arrow is pointing to my right, I'm going to say -0.25. And hit up and say 0.25. That way that's in the right spot. I'm going to make 6 copies of it. I'm going to do an array. So I'm going to do transform, array linear. This is grouped. Number of items, I want to do 6. I always include the original one. My first reference point, I'm going to pick this corner. And then my next reference point, I'm going to pick the next square corner, which is this one. Right? I still got everybody? Cool. So this is the fruit of our labors. We've got these drawings. These drawings are ready to go out.
So you don't need any other boxes?
I don't think so. I put them there, but I think you can get away with just doing one and just making copies of it. Right? I don't know why I necessarily put those all there, but better safe than sorry. Well, you just do one right and then just make copies of it because everything's at the right scale. Yeah, so when we go back to that, and we can rerun that part of it too. Let me just get it all the way out here. So we've got, this is everything that we want to do in our drawing. It should all be in this spot, right? I'm going to export this. I don't think I need to change anything before I export it. Just you want to make sure you use the top view, right? It looks good now, right? But if you're messing around, you're doing something, and maybe you've got your view. By this time, you should only have the top view open. But if I export this is what my drawing's going to look like. It's going to look like that, right? And we don't want that. We want to export out of the top view. It doesn't know what you want. All it knows is what it sees. So out of the top view, I'm going to export it. It's only going to export what's selected. So you want to make sure you've only got everything inside of these lines selected. And I would say export. All right, and I'm going to pick my type as Illustrator. And so I'll call this demo completed 2. Template. I'll call this drawings. This file is just going to be the drawings that came out. Right? You're already going to have another template file in Illustrator. It's going to ask you what scales that you want to use, and you want it to be exactly. You've already done the work of scaling it. So make sure it says 1 inches equals 1 inch. RGB, and we don't want to export a viewport boundary or anything like that. So preserve model scale. We want this thing coming into scale. If you don't bring it, if you use the snapshot, it's not going to line up with the template. So I said okay. Back into Illustrator, I'm going to open up a brand new template. It's going to have the same thing. So when you first open up the template, it looks like this. Illustrator expands all your layers, so don't worry about it being so stretched out there. Those are the keys that actually tell us what drawings we're looking at. And we've got a layer with guides on them. Those guides are just to show you where to put your graphic scale. We're going to bleed everything out to the edges, right? So what used to be our black rectangle, our boundary, is now the boundaries of the page. So they're going to show up in Illustrator, and when you print those, you're going to use those as your cut lines to cut it out so you can have bled drawings. Does everybody know what I mean by that? Okay, so that boundary box is actually doing a lot of your work for you in that sense. It's framing your drawing, it's cropping your geometry, and now it's going to let you cut your stuff out. It's basically acting like a register, so all your stuff's going to line up, especially when you go to stack it, right? So you're going to get a PDF of 6 pages. This is what you're going to print out on paper. It's also what you're going to print out on the transparency film. And one's going to be stacked and one's not. So if it looks a little goofy to have these little guides here, instead of having labels, we're gonna have what is our view: top, bottom, front, back, left, right. One question I hope someone's going to ask, I'm going to ask it now, and because it's Friday and I don't want to wait too long for somebody to ask it, is that what's my front? What's my back? How do I know?
Whatever you have in Rhino, make it consistent. I mean,
Yeah, they have it all organized.
But think about it, right? How do we know? It's all about how you originally set up and physically measured your model. Where's your 0 at, right? If you look on the Cartesian grid, right? If my 0 in the top view here, turn my grid on. Is right here. I'll turn this stuff off. This is my 0 point. It all depends if I measure out from here. I'm actually looking back at my orbit from my project, right? So it kind of just depends on where you're at on it. You can definitely, I think for everyone else, keep it consistent and keep the view what it is in Rhino. So whatever your kind of origin point is, keep track of it and keep track of the coordinate points, right? Because we need to relocate where that is. That's why we've got the numbers going back there. So in a sense, it kind of doesn't matter, but I still think it's an interesting question. Like, am I supposed to actually relate this to somebody else's pound for pound? Or is it actually defined within its own space and relative to that origin point? Meaning, like, I understand it. These coordinates mean one thing. 35, 45 means one thing to you, doesn't mean the same thing to the other person, right? What does make a difference is the difference between 35, 45, and 35 and 25 on the other side. So it's those relative distances that we're worried about. So it's about the consistency. We can always recalibrate something. So I'm back in Illustrator. I've got my template. Because we're stacking things up, we're going to worry about identifying things on the model, right? On like the side of it, so that way we don't have the names on the front. We're going to have a thickness on the model that we're going to use for that. So my only really identification is going to be like that. I've got to bring my drawings in, and this label here has those little keys on it. So you want to leave that on. We've also got the grid numbers. So everyone's going to have their extension lines at different spots, and this is where you're going to identify from the bottom left which one it is. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. from the bottom left. That's a local coordinate system, right? Because you're going to have different views. So it's going to be talking about the coordinates of each point in that particular view. So, you know, 1, 1 is going to be a different point in a different drawing. You're going to have to move these because I've just got them in spots based on, you know, my example, but you're going to have to move those to the right spot when they come in. So mine are going to come in looking great because I used the same 3D model both times, but you're just going to have to take these objects and move them up and down once it comes in, right? So I'll bring that guy in. I'm going to open up that Illustrator file. So I'm going to go back in Rhino. Or not back in Rhino, back actually and open it up in Illustrator. So file, open that up. And I called that one Drawings 2. I'll say update, that's fine. It's just because it's coming out of Rhino. This is what I get coming out of Rhino, right? You can see on the right hand side there, all my layers are good, right? They're all the same. I want to make sure of a couple things. I want to make sure that my annotations are sitting up top. It might come in some random order. It always acts funny when it brings it in from Rhino. Like for instance, it might be hard to read from here, but you'll be able to see on the recording. My annotation for one of my point clouds, my top view one is tucked away here, and all the other ones are up here. You want to bring it up to the top. You want your annotations to sit up top because Illustrator acts like a physical object. It goes from the bottom up, and I don't want my annotations hanging out below, right? I want my different splines here, and I want the markers below the annotations, right? So I've got annotations, I've got markers, I've got my splines. Behind it, I've got all my little XYZ intersections. That's going to be our new Cartesian grid. The graphic scale is kind of hanging out on its own. That's fine being at the bottom. We can, but I'm trying to think how we're looking on that. We can move this one to the top as well. The reference for this scaling drawings is fine at the bottom. That's actually the boundary. It's the same as our boundary object. So if you look in the layer here, I've got a layer called drawings, and that's where I want all this stuff to come in at. The way that we're going to do that is you have to make sure that wherever you're running Illustrator, you've got an option checked. If I'm in my layer manager, I'm going to go into this tiny menu that's always hard to get to, right here with its options, right? I want to make sure that paste remembers layer options on. If that's not on, I'm going to bring it all in, and everything is going to come in as just loose lines, and all the layers are going to be gone. It's going to all that entire drawing all on the one layer that I imported on my active layer. So I'm going to definitely make sure that that one is checked, right? I check back on it, it's checked. Okay, so I go back into my drawings. I'm going to make a layer with the same name. So it's called drawings here. I'm going to make a layer called drawings. I'm going to move it to the top, and that just makes it easier for me to drag all these layers into it. Alright, it's all in this top layer. I'm going to hit Control A to grab all my objects. I'm going to hit Control C to copy into my clipboard. I'm going to go to my template. I'm going to hit Control V to paste it in. You can see I've got all those objects now in my layer. And all I've got to do is line up the corner on the side. If you've got your smart guides on, right, and you can check that being under view, guides, have the smart guides checked, you'll be able to smart guide snap just to that. Not bad, right? Pretty. We keep it all together. We do it one time, set it up ahead of time. We don't have to do it 6 times. We can do it one time. So we've got everything in there. From here, it's just a matter of using some of the line weights, and we have line weights that we want to use on this one. when things come into Illustrator, they're all going to be, by default, they're going to be a 1. So we're going to change that. The things that were already in the template are already the right line weight. There's not a lot of stuff that's in the template, but you definitely don't have to worry about this, right? You don't have to worry about this. You just want to make sure that your drawing is on the bottom, because these keys have little blockers behind them that'll let the lines of that run underneath it, right? So you don't want the drawings above like that, because it'll go above it. So you just want to keep the drawings layer where it is right now. You have to go out of your way to screw this drawing up, so just take your time, right? I moved some of these around just to show you that we want to be moving these. Actually, I think I moved all of these. The scale, the other time I did the drawing, it was at a different scale. So this is where I can hold down shift and just line up my numbers. You just want to get them kind of close, right? The y coordinates are going to be right below it. You just want to be consistent. Get it close there. You don't want to get too far away, because sometimes you're going to have them be really close to each other, and you want to be able to have a convention when they're pretty close to each other. So, right? So my 1 should line up together. This is all Smart Guide doing the work for me. I got 4 there, and I got 5. It's pretty tight. Let's get them in there, right? It's going to sit above, so that's good. All right, the line weights, we're going to take a look at this. My pad's coming in. My template already has the RGB as the palette there. So we're only really using 2 colors. We're going to use black, and we're going to use this kind of third gray from the left. It's all 204s in RGB land. That's the only 2 colors we're really worried about. That and the line thicknesses. My splines are going to come in as 1 point. Black, right? My control polygon, this guy, and I don't want to pick them individually because they may have come across in parts. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I'm going to go into the layer editor and grab all the control polygons at the same time by clicking the little circle next to the layer. So this grabs all of them. And I'm going to change my line type. So on this one, we actually want to do the dotted lines. I'm sure you guys know how to do dashed lines, right? Like that's just by clicking this, right? And it sets it up. Like typically, if you see the dashed lines, it's like this, and we can take a look, and it'll look like that, right? And you control the dash and the gap. So the 3 is the length, and the gap is that. So if I want to make it bigger, I keep changing it. I've got to reselect the lines actually to do that, just to show you what you probably already know. That's how I keep editing it and changing what my line looks like. I can make the gaps bigger. I can make the lengths bigger. So if there's no line type if I try to there's no box or anything if I want the little dots. The dots, the trick to the dots is you've got to use a rounded cap on it, and you want to do 0 when you're talking about, let's see, I wrote it down to make sure I don't tell you the wrong info. My dash is set at 0. And my gap is typically twice the line weight. That's equal distribution. Right? That's a little dense for our drawing. So what we want to do for our drawing is do a 3-point. On the gap. Brought up the magnifier by mistake. I always do this once per time when I do something in Windows. All right, so that's our, we zoom out, we can see that all of them are done in all 6 drawings now for that. So our splines are done. I would say that, you know, we want to make it minimal visibility for the back here. So the back is all on the layer XYZ intersections. Those curves are all on that layer. I'm going to change that to 0.5 thickness, and my color is going to be that 204, and that's going to tuck it a little bit in the background there. Right. Might not be able to see it up on the projector, but I can see it on my screen. You'll be able to see on yours, and we know how much darker it's going to print in real life at this school. So we definitely don't want to overshoot that grid and bleed everything else out. So we're getting close. We've got that. You know, if I to finish the drawing, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me move all of the numbers. There's still 25 of them left. I'm not going to do that. There's actually 50 of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the line weight of the graphic scale. That can be actually my smallest one. I'll keep it black, but I'm going to change that to be 0.25. It's going to grab everything on the layer, right? So it's not going to bother the text. It's going to leave the text alone. But the text is kind of dark on that one. So I think we were saying there's a way to select, Philip, that you can just select text, right? In Illustrator?
What's that?
Can you select just text in Illustrator?
Yeah, select and then save or text object.
Cool. Those other little numbers already made for you were already the right color. You can use the eyedropper to make it this color, or you can just go back and pick that color again. It's this one. It's the light one. I'm going to switch it. I don't want it to have a stroke, right? It needs to have a fill. So I don't want goofy outline text. I want regular text. And that'll actually grab the annotations too. So all the text in the whole file is done.
You leaving the crosshairs?
What's that?
The crosshairs?
The crosshairs are going to be 2 points. That's the last one that we need to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're jumping ahead, but that's the last one. So I'm glad you're thinking of them. So those are hanging out on point markers. So if you know the layer name already because it's the same as Rhino, we're going to bump it up to 2. Leave it black. You just want to make sure you have rounded on there as well for the and the line weights are done on this. So the only thing that's keeping this thing from being done is moving the numbers over, and I can't think of anything else.
Why do the face diagram that you made on each page?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they go down in an angle? Is there a reason for that?
Does anybody know?
Because it just stacks on top of each other.
Yeah. So it's for the acrylic stacking.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that, but that is we're also interested in the order that you guys decide to stack them in. Are we going to mandate that order or not? I don't plan on mandating it. Did you, Philip? No. I think that's another design imperative on your end. It's like what best shows how do these things collide? Do I want to sandwich certain views or not? So that kind of gives you the freedom to do that as well. And we'll always know more or less which one we're looking at a given time. I would also say when we do the stack, when you do the print, probably only print the scale on the top one, right? We don't need 6 of the scales coming down at the same time. The quick way to do that is when you go to do that second printout, grab your graphic scale layer. It's this one. Right?
Why are the crosshairs facing on the first one?
That's a good question. Yeah. Take a look. Don't know. It's odd.
I think you hit it before you made 2D.
I might have just not, yeah, when I did that drawing, I think I did the make 2D after I turned that layer on. That layer was off, so they didn't show up in that first drawing. So, I mean, the good thing about that is it's obvious, right? I mean, it's the darkest thing on the drawing. So, what should I do? Thank you. Yeah, don't run this whole process all over again, right? Just grab these guys and copy them over, right? You guys are resourceful. I'm glad you didn't tell me to go run that whole thing again. But that was a test amongst tests on Friday. Right? Cool. Good eye. Right? So, you know, just get it out of here. We're gonna do let's see, do a save as and just save it as a PDF, and you just want to make sure you use your artboards when you do it. So you want to have that checked. Yep. Oh yeah, and the thing I was saying is with the graphic scales, just right, pick on that layer and then hold down Shift and ungrab that last one. You can lock your drawings and do that. I can't do it now. Lock this stuff. Grab them. And you can get rid of these guys, either hide them or turn them on a layer that you don't want. If I hit Control-3, that's a quick hide. And then I would just, whatever my top one is the one I'm gonna. That's for the clear one. For the paper one, you can leave them all on there. Yeah. So, questions?
So what were you trying to hide? Sorry.
Graphic scales.
The graphic scales.
I was, in the instance that I'm gonna do the acetate, I'm just gonna keep the whatever one's on top.
Try to sneak here.